Thank you, Mary. Our text for today comes from the Ten Commandments, Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. I put the verse for you there on the front of the bulletin. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. I heard about some kids who begged their mom to allow them to buy a hamster. And the mom was against it because she kind of knew what was going to happen, that the kids would take care of it for a while and then they'd get tired of it. And she'd be the one who ended up feeding it every day and cleaning its cage and so on. So she told them that they could get the hamster, but if they ever quit taking care of it, the hamster had to go. So they got a little hamster. They named him Danny. And for about 3 or 4 weeks, they fed the hamster each day, cleaned its cage each week. And then, just as she suspected, they kind of grew tired of it and they quit taking care of it. And she found herself feeding it and cleaning its cage and all of that. She realized, she had enough to do already, and she was not about to start taking care of a hamster for the rest of its life. So she called the kids one day when they came home from school, and she told them, Danny has to go. And she was surprised that they took the news of his departure pretty well. One of the kids said, well, he's been around here such a long time. And the mom replied, yes, he has, but he's too much work for one person, and since I'm that one person, I say he goes. And another one of the kids said, well, maybe if he didn't need so much and he wouldn't be so messy, we could keep him. But the mom was firm, and she said, no, Danny has to go get his cage, he's gone. And the kids in one voice said, Danny? We thought you said Daddy. Now, I tell you that story because it's somewhat reflective of what the attitudes are today in a lot of circles about the importance of men in general and dads particularly in the home. We live in a time where certainly in the secular world the importance of the father in the home has been diminished. Dads aren't seen as being really that important. And even somewhat in the religious world. I remember when I was in seminary a long time ago now, back then there was really very little talk in the church about family issues. It's certainly not like we would see today. Very little emphasis on family ministry in the churches. I remember one book that came out, and the book had a lot to do with shaping some of my views about family ministry, and it was in general a very, very good book. It was by a pastor and later seminary professor named Ken Chafin, and the name of the book was Is There a Family in the House? And I liked 99% of the book, but one thing he said in the book just really stuck with me in a very negative way. He wrote that moms are essential and dads are nice to have. And with all of my being, I disagree with that sentiment. And this is why I chose as our text today this verse from the Ten Commandments that reminds us to give honor to both the mother and the father. That in the plan and providence of God, that dads also have an essential role in the homes, just as mothers do. Now, let me say a word before I get into the message, because I'm going to be talking today about why children need fathers. That's the title of the message. Let me recognize right up front that there are moms in our service today and moms who will be watching by YouTube. You've lost a husband who passed away, and you've become mom and dad and done the best job you can do to be both. This sermon is not for you, and it's not about you. To you, I would say, God bless you. I admire you. I honor you. And I think God gives special grace to women who find themselves in that situation. Also, there would be women whose husbands just left. And for no choice of their own, they just ended up being alone and parenting alone. This sermon is not about you either. And I would say the same thing. I think God gives special grace to women who find themselves in that situation. and you've done the best you can, and I think God honors that, and I honor that and admire that. What I'm going to be talking today is about the mentality that just doesn't see the need for dads, that dads really aren't essential, that they're not of consequence, that you can intentionally set out to have a home without a dad present and end up with just as good a result as if you had a dad in the home. That's where I'm going with this message today, and I want you to hear it in that light. So kids need a mom and a dad. That's the thesis of my message today. It's by God's design. God planned it that way. And I want to tell you why. Why children need, if at all possible, why they need a mom and a dad. One is that men and women are so different psychologically, and just our makeup is different, and therefore what we give to the children is different, and what the children get from us is different. Mothers tend to be, and I know I'm speaking in generalizations here, this doesn't cover blanket every female on the planet and every male on the planet, but generally speaking, moms are more governed by emotion, and dads are more governed by whatever is the opposite of that, if you want to call it logic or just a sense of duty or whatever. And so they react, moms and dads react to situations differently. It's not that one is better than the other, they're just different, and children need both. One example I can give you, Mary and I, there's a walking trail in Whittier, and sometimes we'll go walking on that trail. And we were walking along once, and there was a little boy riding on his bike, and he was with his dad. I'm remembering the little boy, maybe about 4 or 5. This was the boy who fell off of his bike. Is that about 4 or 5? So this little fellow's riding along, and he's got his helmet on, and he rides, he's riding along, and his bike tips over. Now, the dad did exactly what I would have done, and in fact, exactly what I did there. He just stopped and looked at the kid and waited for the kid to get up, pick his bike up, get back on the bike, and take off. Now, Mary's reaction was entirely different to that. She's immediately concerned about the little boy. Is he hurt? Does he need help? Now, which one of those reactions is right? They both are. They're different. And children need both of those. They need the mom who will come in. Mary used to say this thing every time our children got the slightest little, bobo. Mary would say this thing. It's something we learned in Argentina. I guess it's in Spanish. I won't say the whole thing for you, but it's just a little kind of a nursery rhyme in Spanish that says, I hope your wound heals quickly. That's the gist of it. And she would say, to this day, they still remember that. They still remember Mary making a big fuss over their little bobos. And Dad just looks at it very differently. When that little boy fell off of his bike, my only thought was, okay, did he break a limb? Doesn't appear to, he's not screaming, he's fine, get back on your bike, let's go. That's a dad's reaction to that. I'll give you another story. I taught my daughter, Jessica, how to drive. Taught Lisa too. But Jessica, I have a story I want to tell you because it goes to this point I'm making. By the way, anybody who has to learn how to drive in the city of Los Angeles, I tip my cap to you. Because it's a hard place to learn how to drive. But we have close to us where we live the largest cemetery in the world. What's the name of it? Rose Hills. And that's a great place to learn how to drive. Somebody gave me that tip. There are all kinds of roads in there. You can drive all through it without ever coming near anybody's graves. There's nothing disrespectful about it. But you can ride around and you can practice turns and you can practice parking and you're going up and down hills. It's a great place to learn how to drive. So Jessica and I, we're going there pretty much every day for a while. And so when she finally starts kind of driving on her own in there, one day she makes my daughter Emma, granddaughter Emma, is what is known as a child with a strong, willful personality. So just bear with us there. So we're practicing making turns. Now, when you're learning how to drive, it's hard to accept the idea that, like with power steering, you don't have to turn the wheel back once you make the turn. Then it kind of turns back by itself, right? The tendency is to want to manipulate the wheel the whole way rather than just kind of let it turn. So she understood, Jessica did in concept, but not really in practice. So she made a turn, And rather than let go of the wheel so it would come back, she held onto the wheel and drove right into a curb, a cement curb, and it blew the tire out. Now, I wasn't mad because I figured something bad was going to happen. I was just glad we didn't get in a wreck. So a tire, that's no trouble. I've got a spare in the trunk. So I don't say anything. I get out, I get the spare out, and I look at her and I see her little lip is quivering and she's all upset. And I say to her, do you understand the mistake you made? Now that's a dad talking, because dads are teachers. Dads want to give instruction. Dads want to correct. And so my thing here is I want to make sure she knows the mistake she made so she doesn't make it the next time. I'm a compassionate person. I've got a good heart. My wife will testify to that. But the thought of doing anything beyond that never occurred to me. So when I get home and I tell the story to Mary, the first thing Mary says is, did you give her a hug? I've got to admit, it never crossed my mind. And then I felt really bad. I said, no, I didn't. I didn't even think about that. Now, I'm sure Mary went and gave her a hug after that, and I kicked myself for not thinking of that on my own. But it's just the difference between men and women, and between moms and dads. And the kid who has both is blessed. The kid who has the mom to give the emotional support and the hugs and all of that. But also the dad to say, all right, let's look at what the mistake was, let's correct it, and let's move on. That child is blessed too. So moms and dads are different by design. God made us that way. What we offer to children is different, and it's a good thing. Second thing is that dads are important to child's development, psychological development. We have a recent psychology graduate here, Catherine. You'll understand this, that children go through different stages of development, and dads play an important role in every one. Mentally, psychologically, emotionally, when a good dad is present in the home, not just any dad, but a good dad is present in the home, kids will do better at school, they'll do better at dating when that time comes, and so on. And one of the most important lessons a child will learn about life in general and about men specifically is, can I trust men? And they learn that from their dads. When we lived in Argentina, I was out in the yard one day, out in the backyard with, I know my son William was there. I can't remember if the girls were there or not. But I was working out in the backyard, and there was a dog house that had been left there by the previous owners. And I didn't realize it. It was behind me, and I didn't realize that William had climbed up on top of the dog house. He was maybe 4 or so at the time. And I was in front of him doing something, and all of a sudden he yells, "Dad!" And when I turned around, he had already jumped off of the doghouse, jumping toward me. And fortunately, I saw him in time, and I caught him, and I asked him, why on earth would you jump before I had even turned around? And he said, because I knew you would catch me. Now, kids learn that about men early on. Can I trust men? And they learn that from their dads, and they don't learn it by anything their dads say to them. They learn it by how their dads are. Moms, you can't give that to your children because you're not a biological male. Only men can do that. And there is great security in a child's emotional well-being if they learn early on that they can rely on their dad. The third thing is that dads teach things, and it's related to that one. Dads teach their children things that moms can't teach them. And it's not because moms are defective, it's because moms aren't men. And of course the opposite of this one is true. Moms teach things to their kids that dads can't teach. We're just different. And specifically what I have in mind here is that women can't teach men how to behave like men, at least not by example. You can tell them, and you should, you can correct them and say that a man ought to behave like this and so on, but you can't give them the example. Only a man can do that. I talked earlier about the difference between men and women in terms of emotions. And what I noticed today, where we live in a world where increasingly, almost 50% of the population now are being raised in homes where no men are present, I see a lot more males today, I'm talking about young males, who act like girls more than they act like boys. And the reason is they've been raised by women and not with no man in the home. And that's not to fault the job the women have done. There's a certain part of child rearing that only the man can do, just like there are certain parts that only the woman can do. And I see a lot of boys today who are emotion driven. Men or males, it is of the utmost importance that males be raised to be honor driven and driven by a sense of duty, by a sense of rightness, and not by their emotions. If you get a man who doesn't learn by the time he reaches adulthood to do things that are right, not because he feels like doing them, but just because they're right, you've got a menace to society on your hands. Because you get some guy whose body is raging with testosterone and he hasn't learned to control himself and to have himself in subjection, and he just does whatever he feels like doing with no consequence to anybody, you've got a menace on your hands. And so men need to be taught, males need to be taught not to be emotion driven, but to be driven by a sense of rightness. Cornelia Condro said that the country is dying today for lack of men, not a lack of programs. And I would agree with that. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." And that key word there, to train, doesn't happen by accident. It happens intentionally. And one of my greatest concerns for the future of America is right in this realm we're talking here. Almost half the kids being raised today in America are being raised just by moms, with no dad in their in their lives. In 1960, listen to this, in 1960, 5% of the children born in America were born to an unmarried mother. 5%. In 1980, it was 18%. By 2000, it was 33%. By 2015, it was 41%. You see where those numbers are going? Over 4 out of 5 kids born into families where there's no dad, and the numbers are trending inward. Stephen Colbert said, "America used to live by the motto, fathers knows best. Now we're lucky if father knows he has children." And I would say amen to that. So dads, you play an important role in teaching your children. And number 4 is, dads, your presence in the home gives your children a sense of security. We're talking about why children need their dads. Number 4, that your presence in the home gives your children a sense of security. There are not a lot of things I agree with Sigmund Freud on, but one thing I agree with him wholeheartedly. Freud said, "I cannot think of any need in childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection." Dads are bigger and stronger by design. And your male presence in the home, your strength in the home, gives security to your children. In the 38 years that we've been married, there have been sometimes, every couple, you're asleep at night and you hear a strange noise in the house or outside, right? I have never once, when I hear a noise, awakened my wife to say, "Mary, there's a noise, go check it, go see what it is." Not only have I never done that, the thought has never crossed my mind. Now, she has awakened me to say, "There's a noise in the house, go see what it is." I don't resent that. Any man will tell you it's in our DNA. We're just hardwired this way. And not only do I do it, I want to protect her. There is a need in me that God placed there to protect my wife. Just as she has a need placed in her to be protected by me. God made us that way. It's not just physical, it's psychological. And so, dads, you give a sense of security in the home. Number 5, I've got 7, and I'm going to go through these last 3 kind of quickly. His dads bring financial stability and security to the home. Someone said a father is a guy who has snapshots in his wallet where his money used to be. Maybe so, but I'll make that trade any day. Studies show that children, listen to this, children who grow up without fathers are 5 times more likely to live in poverty. 500% more. 5 times more likely to commit crimes, and that's directly related to the poverty. 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. That's kids who grow up without a dad. A good dad will be a good provider. He will work hard and do as much as he has to do and whatever he has to do to make sure he provides food and clothing and shelter for his family. Number 6, fathers give spiritual leadership in the home. I read just this week that the typical congregation in America draws an adult crowd that is 61% female. And that's all categories of adulthood. 61% female. So you must think a lot of men just don't believe in God, right? Well, listen to this. Over 90% of American men say they believe in God. 5 out of 6 consider themselves to be Christians, but only 1 out of 6 attends church. Now, what happens to a family when dad doesn't go to church? From the same study, and this was in Focus on the Family, they released the study, but it was done by the Pew Research Center. If a child is the first person in a family to become a Christian, there's a 3% likelihood that the rest of the family will become Christians. Now, Edna, you're one of them, because you talked about your parents becoming believers afterward. It does happen. It's very rare, though. 3% of the time. That's if a child becomes a Christian first. If the mother becomes a Christian first, there's a 17% likelihood that the rest of the family will follow. So from child to mom, it goes from 3% to 17%. You know what the number is if a dad gets active in church? If a dad becomes a Christian and starts going to church, what's the likelihood that the rest of the family will too? 93%. 93%. So dads, you have a spiritual obligation in the home, and that's why your kids need you. And then the very last one is dads need children in the home for their example. You know, most dads talk less than their wives do. I don't know if this is typical of men or not. I find the older I get, the less I talk. And it's not that I don't have thoughts anymore, I just don't feel compelled to share them as much as I used to. I find the older I get, the less I feel like talking. But interestingly, dads, most of the teaching you do isn't through your words anyway, it's through your example. Someone said that values are more caught than taught. I put some of these quotes in the bulletin. Clarence Kellen said, "My dad didn't tell me how to live, he lived, and he let me watch him do it." And my favorite one from the Italian writer Umberto Eco said this, "I believe that what we become depends on what our fathers teach us at odd moments, when they aren't trying to teach us. We are formed by little scraps of wisdom." I've been thinking about that quote all week long. There is so much truth there. And the lesson is, Dad, that when it comes to communicating your values to your children, you don't really do it by the things you say, you do it by the things you do. I mentioned my dad being a hard worker. My dad never once said to me, it's important to work hard. He just got up every day and went to work. And from that, I learned the value of hard work. So this is why children need their dads. They need your God-given male presence and personality in the home. They need you for your role in childhood development. They need you for the things that only men can teach. They need you for the sense of security that you bring. They need you for the financial security they bring. They need your leadership in the home spiritually, and they need the example that you give. Dads, it doesn't happen by accident. It happens by choice. You have to make family a priority. One of the lessons of life that has stuck with me, one of my heroes in the ministry was W.A. Criswell at First Baptist Church of Dallas. He was pastor there for something like 50 years. There was a time when it was the largest Protestant church in the world. He was By every standard of success, at least what you would see on the outside, he was a success in the ministry. He was the guy, people aspire to be. And when I was in seminary, he came to our campus and gave a week of lectures, and there was a question and answer period at the end of each one. And one day, this guy, who was probably, outside of Billy Graham, the most famous Protestant clergyman in the world, somebody asked him a question. He was near the end of his ministry then, and they asked him, if you could go back and do it all over again, what would you do differently? And he said only one thing: I would spend more time with my family. And he said, I was a success as a pastor, I was a success in church, and I was a failure as a dad. Man, that hit me like a lightning bolt. And I realized, if I have to come to the end of my ministry and say, I failed as a family, but I succeeded as a pastor, I have no interest in that. I'd rather say I succeeded as a dad. And that really, it changed my life, and it changed my ministry. And so I want to give you dads that challenge. Put your family first. Be the dads your kids and your wives need you to be, and let everything come after that. I want to pray with you before we dismiss today. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for the great gift of fatherhood. We thank you for the challenge that it is. And we readily confess to you this morning that on our own we are not up to the challenge. But we know that you give us the promise in your word that we can do all things through Christ, that you've not left us alone, that your Spirit resides within us. Help us today to take your word and the power of your Spirit to be the Christian men in our homes that you designed us to be. Bless these Christian men who are here today in all that they do. Help us to be godly men. Help us to be good Christian dads. I pray this today in Jesus' name.